his vehicle brandishing a .38 pistol and shouted, "Perhaps someone will be killed," if authorities didn't allow him to see the president. Harris ran to the golf club shop, took 2 White House aides and 5 others hostage, and told police and Secret Service agents he wanted to talk to Reagan about foreigners taking American jobs. He also demanded whiskey and food be brought to him. Reagan was informed of the hostage crisis while on the 16th hole. The president called Harris twice, but each time Harris hung up on him because he wanted to talk to Reagan face to face. The president was then evacuated by helicopter away from the course. Police soon brought Harris's mother and brother to the golf course to reason with him. Within 2 hours, 4 of the hostages were released, and a 5th hostage had to run to safety. Harris then released the remaining hostages and surrendered. He was charged with making threats against the president, assault of or resistance to a federal officer, and possession of a weapon during the commission of a felony. But the federal charges were dropped in favor of state kidnapping charges. Harris pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in prison and 10 years probation. In 1987, he said that though he probably would not repeat his actions when released from prison, he did not regret them. As a result of the hostage crisis, President Reagan gave up playing golf anywhere but a friend's private estate. He thought that playing on public courses put others at unnecessary risk. The following year, 25-year-old high school dropout David Mahansky arrived at the White House carrying a sawed-off shotgun. Mahansky, who'd been hospitalized for psychiatric treatment, had made threats against President Reagan and was under surveillance by both the FBI and the Secret Service. Mahansky's uncle, Howard Engel, said his nephew had repeatedly talked about going to see the president and straightening him out, adding that Mahansky had been treated for drug use, particularly cocaine. When he was high, Engel said, he blamed the establishment for everything. Mahansky traveled to Washington, D.C. several times in March 1984 and frequently visited the White House. During this time, he also bought a shotgun at a York, Pennsylvania store. On the evening of March 15, 1984, Mahansky was observed by 2 Secret Service uniformed officers walking along a sidewalk outside the south lawn of the White House. They determined that he was acting in a suspicious manner. When the officers approached Mahansky, he wheeled around and pointed his 16-gauge shotgun at them. The gun, which had been concealed under his coat, had 1 live round of ammunition. The 2 officers told Mahansky to hand over his weapon. When he failed to respond, one of the officers shot him in the right forearm. Mahansky was then taken to a District of Columbia General Hospital, where he was treated for a fracture of the right forearm, then held in a special hospital cell. President Reagan was in the White House at the time of the shooting. When Mahansky was arraigned before a judge, he insisted that he had been drugged by President Reagan, the CIA, the FBI, and the Air Force. He also said that the government agents had put a bug in his head that transmitted everything I think across the country. "I don't need another nut ward. The president has had me in 3 already. The president of the United States and certain elements of society fill me with drugs and ruin my life like the communists would. I've had just about enough." He added that he had been, quote, down to the White House to ask the president to order the FBI to take that bug out of my ear. In September 1984, a federal jury found Mahansky guilty of assault on a federal officer and carrying a sawed-off shotgun outside the White House. He was committed to St. Elizabeth's Hospital until ruled competent. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and spent 9 months in the hospital before he was released. 2 years later, the Secret Service investigated 2 mentally unbalanced men. James Neville was a 30-year-old man who had been hospitalized for mental problems 38 times over the preceding 10 years. The Social Security Administration had determined he was unfit for work due to his mental impairments. In 1982, he'd been investigated for making threats to kill Reagan, but no action had been taken. On April 28, 1987, 8 days after discharging himself from the Missouri State Hospital, an intoxicated Neville walked into the Festus, Missouri police station and told officers he had been paid $35,000 to assassinate the president with an Uzi submachine gun. The purported assassination plan was to take place sometime in May. The local police reported Neville to the Secret Service. When he was interviewed at the Festus jail, he repeated his threats. When he was asked what he would do if he were released from custody, he replied, "Put a bullet in the president's head." Neville was indicted by a grand jury on the charge of threatening the president. He was found competent to stand trial. Neville pleaded insanity, but the jury returned a guilty verdict, and Neville was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. In lieu of incarceration in a federal prison, he was committed to a psychiatric facility. Reagan was the recipient of numerous lethal devices during his 8 years in office. On August 31, 1981, Earl Bruton, a 54-year-old man from Detroit, sent Reagan a threatening letter wrapped around 6 sticks of dynamite. He was angry at being denied loans through the Federal Small Business Administration. Bruton had sent similar devices to local Detroit newspapers. He was arrested and sentenced to 12 years in prison. In 1986, Reagan visited Spokane, Washington, to campaign for Republican Senator Slade Gorton. Before the visit, Secret Service agents had been informed that notes found in an elevator of a local motel gave details about security personnel around the Spokane Coliseum, where Reagan was due to give a speech. The notes included the descriptions of security vehicles, including license numbers and the notation 10-2886 at 123. After checking the motel's registration records, agents compared the handwriting on the note and matched it to a guest, 23-year-old ex-con Robert Nelson. Agents entered Nelson's motel room and questioned him about the note. They found a bullet attached to a note on a dresser. The note said, "Reagan will die," and "If I miss, Karlop won't." Karlop was a nickname for Libyan leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. The other side of the note read, "For you, Mr. President." When Agent Peter Dowling searched Nelson's car, he found a loaded 5-shot revolver and a box of ammunition. He also discovered stolen credit cards in a litter bag. Nelson was arrested and charged with threatening the life of President Reagan. He told Dowling his assassination plot was designed to return him to prison so he could be with his homosexual lover. In May 1987, Nelson pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. President Reagan was also the target of stalkers. According to Robert De Prospero, who headed the White House presidential detail for 6 years, the president received a threatening letter from a man who called himself Catman. Catman had been stalking Reagan and Senator Alphonse D'Amato since 1981. He called the White House numerous times and sent letters to the president that mentioned security details that were unknown to the general public. He also sent close-up photographs of his intended victims when they appeared at political events, and he also included lots of photos of cats. When Secret Service agents eventually caught Catman on a New York subway in 1983, they discovered photographs that revealed he had positioned himself outside the fence at the New York City mayor's residence, Gracie Mansion, during a presidential visit. Catman had been close enough to shoot President Reagan, but his shot had apparently been blocked by agents. Threats to President Reagan continued after he left office. Reagan and his wife moved back to California and bought a single-story, 3-bedroom flagstone mansion. The house stood behind a wall and a security fence on a hillside dotted with orange palms. In 1981, 33-year-old Gregory Stewart Gordon came to the attention of the Secret Service when he made several threats to kill the president. He had been committed to mental institutions for the offenses. On his release, Gordon was still obsessed with killing Reagan. In July 1990, he climbed over the fence of the Reagan home and ran up the driveway, through the house, and out the back door. At the time, President Reagan was sitting beside the swimming pool. Nancy was in the bedroom and witnessed Secret Service agents chasing the attacker. Agents soon caught up with Gordon, who was unarmed, and arrested him. Gordon told agents he wanted to strangle the president and that he was Christ in the second coming. He said Reagan was the Antichrist who must be killed and I must kill him. Gordon was sentenced to 2 years in prison. During his trial, Secret Service agents said Gordon's statements about killing Reagan were coherent and serious. His lawyer said his client had simply been trying to draw attention to himself so he could end up in a rehabilitation center. But Gordon insisted he had been trying to kill Reagan for 10 years and would return to finish the job after he was released from prison. In 1992, his appeal was rejected.
Hey everyone, Scott here. One more brief word from our sponsors.
In 2012, 8 years after Reagan's death, it was revealed that singer John Lennon's assassin, Mark David Chapman, had planned to threaten Reagan. Like Hinckley, Chapman lusted for notoriety and had a list of people he wanted to kill, including Elizabeth Taylor, Johnny Carson, Jacqueline Kennedy, and George C. Scott. He chose them simply because they were famous, and he expected to attain instant notoriety. In a 2012 prison confession, the 55-year-old Chapman said he targeted Lennon on December 8, 1980, because the 40-year-old Beatle just happened to be more accessible at the time. Although Chapman said he didn't really want to shoot Reagan, he did confess his plan was to disrupt his inauguration by firing a few shots. In January 1989, President Reagan concluded his second term as president. He said there were two things he was proudest of. One is the economic recovery. The other is a recovery of our morale. America is respected again in the world and looked to for leadership. 5 years after leaving office, the former president announced he was suffering from Alzheimer's, an incapacitating brain disease. In 1994, he said farewell to the American public in a handwritten letter released to the press. He said he was setting out on the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life. In May 2004, a month before his death, Nancy Reagan said her husband's disease was worsening. Ronnie's journey, she said, has finally taken him to a distant place where I can no longer reach him. Well, Reagan died in 2004, but was successfully protected during his time in office. We're going to jump to the 1990s in the next episode and look at the presidency of Bill Clinton. And then after that, we're going to wrap up this series looking at the Obama administration. See you then.
All right, well, that was the episode for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. First of all, I'd like to thank the Knowlton's Rangers, and especially our spy masters, Baron Fraser, Carl from Norway, Chris from Maine, Moondoggy from Ohio, and Rick Knowlton, and I'll explain what that means in a second. If you want to support the show and help me keep producing this content, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, subscribe to the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to do that, you can go to historyunplugpodcast.com and there you'll find instructions. 2, join our Facebook group, which you can find if you just search for History Unplugged. And please like and share posts that I put up about new episodes. 3, submit a question to me so that I can answer it on air. You can email me at info@historyonthenet.com or leave a voicemail. And again, go to historyunpluggedpodcast.com and you'll find instructions. Lastly, and I think this one is the best, is to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. The Knowlton's Rangers were an elite reconnaissance and espionage detachment of the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the History Unplugged membership program. Learn how to join by going to patreon.com/unplugged. So here's what you get if you become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you join at the level of Scout, you can get early access to new podcast episodes, along with enjoying absolutely every single episode of the History Unplugged podcast ad-free. All 270 and counting episodes. If you join at the level of Intelligence Officer, you can also get access to premium episodes, like a multi-part series on the life of Audie Murphy, the most decorated combat soldier in World War II, or the 10-part series Ottoman Lives, a series that looks at the cast of characters that made up the Ottoman Empire, such as the Sultan, the Eunuch, the harem servant girl, and the soldier. And finally, if you join at the level of Spy Master, you get all the same stuff as the Scouts and Intelligence Officers, but you also get a shout-out to you and or your business at the end of each episode, a 3-pack of hardcover history books, plus you'll be put at the very front of the line for me to answer your question about history, and I can guarantee I will dedicate an episode that's about an hour long or so to your question. Sign up at patreon.com/unplugged. Again, that's patreon.com/unplugged. Anyway, those are the ways you can help out the show. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get your daily dose of all things history related, from ancient Greece to the Cold War. We'll see you next time at the History Unplugged podcast.